So you're struggling with watercolor. I am here to help, but my advice today won't look or sound like others because, friends, I don't look or sound much like others. I fill a watercolor gap, and not because I'm better or more capable. Nope, because these souls here have tons of amazingness to teach you. I fill a gap because while many artists need a reminder to rediscover their inner child, I am continually challenging myself to harness my inner adult. My personal work is a constant balance of seriousness and play, and that battle or mingling of opposing approaches gives me a lot of curious techniques and at times a lot of debatable opinions. Recently, I watched a few episodes of Painting with John on Netflix, and he too wrangles with his childlike spirit of play in the sense that his serious adult side is the one that needs nudging sometimes. But what we serial creative spirits have to teach you is this: there is an exception to every rule. That you can certainly count on. Today, I'm going to share 5 rules of watercolor that you may not have realized you were even breaking, but I'm also going to share the butt of every one of those rules. But before we get to that, I have just one more story. See, I've been making art of all kinds since I was 6 years old. No lie, my obsession runs deep. You name it, I've not only dabbled, I've gone deep. Oil, acrylic, wheel thrown, and hand-built pottery, crafting, sculpture, home DIY. If it's creative, I've chased after it. My experience with so many mediums makes it infinitely clear how special watercolor is, how it is equally a compelling art medium and metaphor for life. And as such, I like to approach painting with watercolor from a physical and emotional point of view. The physical of watercolor is the rule, and you guessed it, the emotional counterpart is the exception. Okay, friends, now that I've told you about all the different types of art I've tried, I want to hear from you. What are some of the different art mediums you've tried? What have been your favorites, and which ones will you never go back to again? And while I have you, I'd love if you'd give this video a boop so far. If you've enjoyed my stories, that would be awesome. It really helps the channel out. Rule number 1 that you're probably breaking is too much pressure from the brush to the page. Consistent pressure is usually the result of concentrating really hard and trying not to screw things up. But when you create consistent lines over and over again, that can lead to kind of a boring mark on the page. You can see here, I'm purposely trying to create the same stroke over and over again with kind of a heavy hand, as I like to call it. And you can see the results are kind of static and uninteresting. Let's see what happens when I go in with a lighter touch and try to give each of these strokes a little bit more personality. Instantly more exciting. You see, when you stop worrying about making the perfect stroke over and over and over again, things on the page, well, things between your hand, your brush, and the page get a lot more exciting. But here it comes. A ton of pressure in a few places in your composition can make some insanely interesting marks and improve your composition. In this case, being super mindful about breaking a particular rule in a few mindful places has a ton of visual power. So here I'm taking a super juicy color and pressing heavily over and over in just a few spots in this composition. And yes, the strokes are similar to one another. And yes, they're dark and heavy. But because they're sparse, they add just a twinkle of heaviness and a whole lot of interest. Rule number 2 that you're probably breaking is too much friction or back and forth with your brush. Continual, repetitive back and forth within the same area on the page leads to, dare I say, muddier colors than desired, a breakdown of your paper potentially, and a lot of yucky, weird textures, otherwise known as overworking. It usually happens when you're attempting to perfect that shape, the leaf, the petal, the swirl, whatever it may be. And your obsession with getting it just so and just right increases the pressure on your brush without you even really knowing it because you're so intense and focused. And then all the bad stuff happens. So if we go in with a lighter touch, more deliberate, and yes, a more confident stroke, which obviously more confident strokes come with time, but you can see the leaf has a much more lighter, airier, and convincing vibe. And notice there are imperfections. The silhouette, the edges aren't perfect, but being okay with that actually gives your leaf more life. Okay, Kristy, we get it. A light touch, no back and forth. Haha, but mindful blending on the page over and over again with light pressure, where you're dabbing in colors wet on wet, can create some of the most magical moments, gorgeous ombre, and some of the most captivating washes of color that I've ever laid down on paper. Watch what I'm doing here. I'm creating a silhouette, but I'm going in with a light touch and working and reworking, pulling out color, pushing more color back on the page, lifting out with a clean, dry brush, adding more color in again. It's all about the light touch. If I were to do this same series of strokes, but with a heavy hand, my paper, no matter the quality, would already be starting to show some stress. I've mentioned this idea before. I call it push and pull. And so while you don't want too much back and forth or too much friction, the idea of a light push and a mindful pull of color to and from the page creates some gorgeous, gorgeous moments. This might just be one of my favorite exceptions to a rule. Seriously, look at that. Rule number 3. Not using enough water. Too dry of a brush can lead to strangely scratchy, uneven surfaces on your paper that feel overdone and definitely messy. It can leave your painting feeling like it went through a struggle, like it's in turmoil. And there's that friction again. Your paper is not going to like you for it. And if you're wondering what I mean, if you've ever had your paper produce these little pills like an old sweater, yeah, that's what I'm talking about. Let's try it again with a better amount of water on our brush, and clearly the colors flow. You have more time to make decisions about what to do next because your paper's staying damp for longer. Brush strokes convey a certain sense of ease on the page instead of struggle. And when you have enough water on your brush, the pigment starts to dance like you would expect watercolor to do. But friends, there is a technique called dry brush. A dry brush loaded with a few colors or even just one color can add curious texture over otherwise unremarkable washes of color. There's nothing I love more in a landscape composition than a contrast between big, washy, light, sheer areas on the page with super textural, tight, detailed moments. Kind of like this shrubbery amongst the red rock I'm adding here with a very, very dry, scratchy brush. When you get it just right, you almost feel like you're shading with a really soft pencil. And it produces the most lovely effect on textured watercolor paper. Mistake number 4, too much water on the brush. Too much water on the page can lead to uneven washes and weird watermarks when dry. A lot of you refer to them as hard edges that you just don't understand how they're happening. This could be your culprit. When you have a puddle of color on the page and it starts to dry, those pigment particles sometimes move to the edges of the puddle or collect in the middle of the puddle. And when it dries, you have the weird cauliflower effect, or even weirder, hard edges that are really unpredictable. But when you can manage your puddles or prevent them altogether, you're going to have a much more smoother transition from light to dark in your watercolor washes. And you're also going to be able to avoid those crazy explosions of one color into another when you don't want them to happen. Oh, friends, I lied. This might be my favorite but or exception. Because let me tell you what, a puddle on the page that's controlled and has a purpose, like in this sky, oh, it's such good fun. Now, admittedly, this is 600 GSM Arches watercolor paper. It's about a 1/16 of an inch thick, so it can handle water, unlike a lot of other papers out there. But you could do this on standard paper as well. So get those puddles down on the page. Keep that brush moving. Blend as the puddles start to dry. So basically keep an eye on your puddles. You be the master of those puddles. Let them dry and make sure no weirdness is happening as they dry. And how do you do that? Scoop up parts of the puddle when you start to see particles collect. You can even pick up the page and let gravity take over a little bit. Spread those puddles around. This is one of my favorite ways to attack a sky. Before we get to our last rule, friends, I would love to know which of the first 4 you, quote unquote, break the most. Me? Definitely too much water. And if you're finding value in this video and you're learning something, I would love if you'd give the video a boop. It's a like. Mistake number 5, too much thinking. Too much thinking looks like a blank page. Never starting. Stressing about wasting your supplies. I bet you didn't think there'd be a but or an exception to this rule, but you know what? There is. Too much thinking also looks like the right kind of thinking. It looks like building strong habits along your art journey, establishing healthy mindsets, and taking your creative journey so serious that you schedule time to just play. I've got the perfect project for you next. It's a quick one. Go get it, friends. And until next time, happy painting.